All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code podcast5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Welcome back to the show. Before we get started with today's guest, I wanted to make a few announcements. The BEWELL by Kelly protein powder is now available on my website and on Amazon, so you can find it at both locations. It's 100% grass-fed beef isolate with organic monk fruit and organic flavoring like organic vanilla powder or organic cacao. Really simple ingredients to build a whole food Fab4 smoothie. Second, I want to thank everyone who's taken the time to review the show. I got this review this morning and it really resonated with me and made me so happy. And I'm really excited. So the review is called One of the Greats. I stumbled upon Kelly's podcast during a season of personal growth, which led me to both of her books. And with that new outlook on nutrition and body love, I feel empowered. I've learned so much from Kelly and the guests she brings on. I find her interview style to be engaging and fun. She asks the burning questions and brings a bright energy to every episode. Thanks for all that you do, Kelly. Well, thank you, Ashley, for reviewing the show, and thanks for tuning in. I hope to continue to bring you awesome content like today's guest, Dr. Morgan Cutlip. Dr. Morgan is a psychologist and a lover of long relationships. She's also the founder of My Love Thinks, a place to help you learn how to build and maintain happy, healthy, and lasting relationships. They host online courses and webinars, and it's all about where you are in your life. Whether you're single or dating, committed, or looking for personal growth, this is a place to focus on building those lifelong relationships. So without further ado, let's get to Morgan. You guys, I'm so excited to have Dr. Morgan Cutlip on the show today. I have been following her for a little while now. And it's funny, you become a mom and then all of a sudden you're like, I need to follow all the therapists that tell me how to raise my children, save my marriage. Just really create that foundation of making sure that I'm making all of these things a priority. So it's such a pleasure to have you on the show, Morgan. You are really an expert when it comes to everything from nurturing a marriage to what does marriage look like after kids to mom guilt and getting our needs met and sort of all of the things out there when it comes to being a mom, which means you're basically everything. You're the wife, you're the head of the household, you're running everything. True. So it's just, I can't thank you enough for your time. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge.
It's such an honor to be here. When I saw you pop into my DMs, I was like starstruck because I heard you years ago on Jenna Kutcher's podcast. I was like, this is amazing. I can't believe I get to be spending this time with you. So thank you for having me.
Oh, I mean, I think we all just have our thing, the stuff that we're obsessed with and the things that we want to go deep into the research on and the tools that we want to create for people to make life a little easier. Jenna does that with social media and brand building, and you're doing that with marriage and really like solidifying that relationship. And I might just be doing that with, food and blood sugar. So it's like we all have our thing. So it's really fun. Really fun to cross-pollinate, really fun to bring you on, because I think now more than ever with COVID and everyone's lives turned a little bit upside down and really needing to work together in our marriages and, our days all look really different. I really just want to give people the tools, those everyday tools that they can start to incorporate in their life. And I think we should start chronologically. I mean, I know you're an expert in marriage post kids and mom guilt and all the things. But for people listening who are maybe just in a relationship pre-kids, I know from personal experience and from some of my friends and my clients that making that transition into being a parent, not just in a marriage, is sometimes a little overwhelming. People are afraid that their marriage is going to change. And do you have tips for people on how to really evaluate and then nurture that relationship so that it's solid before going into that stage of life? Yeah.
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, we could talk about this the entire time, but I'll start kind of big picture and then we can get more specific. So, some things that are really important to remember are some basic sort of laws or norms in relationships. And the first one is that it's normal for relationships to become out of balance. We kind of live in this culture that perpetuates this idea of balance. Like, we're just trying to find balance. We're just trying to balance it all. It's like constantly we're talking about finding some sort of balance, but it's a complete myth. It doesn't exist. We're all really just balancing all of these different roles and aspects of our life. So it's totally, totally normal for a relationship to become out of balance. And this happens in such a major way after kids. It's so easy to just kind of cruise along, kind of in this like sort of like adventurous bliss, I think, before kids come along, and they just sort of in one fell swoop completely imbalance things in the relationship. And that's totally normal. But the second law is that while it's normal to become imbalanced, it's not healthy or good to stay imbalanced. And our relationships are not self-correcting. And so it's really important that while we recognize, in this transition to welcoming kids into the relationship, that, hey, this is normal, we're a little bit out of balance here, that we actually need to do something about it, because if we stay in this imbalanced state, that's when vulnerabilities can start to develop in our relationship. And so the third natural sort of conclusion of the two is that we have to be managers of our relationship. And I think the big sort of picture, easy answer to how do you prepare your relationship for kids is that you have to have some sort of plan. I think before kids, it's really easy to sort of just cruise through your life. It's like, oh, we're relocating. That's a fun adventure. Oh, we're, moving cross country, or you got a job promotion, or this came up. That's an adventure. And it's easy to just kind of ride the waves of your life together and not really struggle quite as much. But when kids are thrown into the mix, it's more important than ever to have a plan where you come together and you know how you're going to tackle these things together and how you're going to touch base in your relationship to make sure you don't have these chronic imbalances that start to erode the closeness of your relationship.
Yeah. So for the managers of our relationship, do you have recommendations of how we should be talking about our relationship? I know from personal experience, it's funny because I do these podcasts a lot about science and health, and I'm not really talking about Chris very much. But then I start talking to my friends about manifestation or about relationships. And I'm like, well, let me just bring my relationship into it. I always want to talk about my relationship. And Chris is always like, we're great. Why do we always want to talk? What are you talking about? We're both healthy. We're happy. We have an awesome kid. But I'm always trying to turn the dial, tweak it a little bit here and there. How often should we be talking about our relationship?
you're bringing up something that is so common, which is this belief that we only talk about our relationship when something's wrong. So it's like, and I think that so many of us, it's like one partner out of the couple who's like, we don't need to talk about things. We're good. Like, if you need to talk, that means that things are not good and we are fine. And so there's this sort of like knee-jerk reaction to that conversation. Like, can we talk about our relationship? So I always recommend, and in our course for couples, we give a plan for this, but to schedule regular like check-ins with each other. So it just depends on your relationship. So monthly works if you need more check-ins or you're dealing with a major transition like having kids. It might need to be weekly. And you come together for like 20 minutes and you touch base on where you are in your relationship. How are we doing with meeting each other's needs? How's our sexual relationship going? How is our opinion of each other? Are we starting to kind of build up some resentments or some, negative attitudes towards each other, and check in on this stuff. And this is important because one, it dispels that belief that you only talk when things are bad. It kind of normalizes this need to regularly talk about your relationship because they just need talked about, and they're dynamic things that are constantly changing. And so we have to check in. And also women, when you look at research, tend to be the managers of the relationship. We're the ones who are kind of keeping tabs. We're noticing when the dials need a little adjusting. And so we carry that responsibility. And so when it's something that's just scheduled, it's just on the calendar, it's just a normal part of your routine as a couple, it takes that off of that partner's plate.
I love that. Now I'm going to use that not against him, but I'm going to make sure that he's going to be like, I just met with... I can interview Morgan on my podcast, and guess what
and she says?
No, but I think it is so important because I'm really open. Like, I'm an open book, and Chris is more, he's cerebral and he's an introvert and he loves to like surf by himself. And he processes things on his own. So when I'm processing things out loud, I'm doing it right now on our podcast. I'm sure people listening are like, you do this all the time. But it's how I work things through. And I will say everything that's in my head without a filter. Never trying to be mean, or I'm just trying to be honest. Like, I don't even know if these feelings are valid, but this is just coming up for me. I think it is definitely something for him that if I'm bringing something up, it is a problem. Yes. And so normalizing that is important. A couple things you just touched on is like communication and sex and like all of that. How are we bringing up those conversations and wanting to have a really raw, honest conversation without people thinking it's a problem?
Well, I mean, that's sort of what this like scheduled meeting will accomplish is if it just becomes part of routine, then it's not like you're talking because there's a problem. You're talking just because that's what you guys do. And these meetings, it's so important that they're short. There's like a couple things that are important. One, that they need to be short. If these are meetings where it's like 2 hours later, you have gone down rabbit holes you never intended, nobody's going to want to have that meeting the next time around. And they also should stay very positive. And so this isn't a time to like get into necessarily all of the little details of everything that you want to change in your relationship. It's kind of just touching base, and even maybe then scheduling a time to talk about maybe communication issues in the future, or schedule a time to have a date night or something like that. So it's kind of just like a planning session where you come together because you want it to be a positive experience that you come back to time and time again versus like hashing through everything.
Right. Are there specific topics you recommend that couples are talking about in these check-ins?
Totally. So we give a very detailed plan in our course, but essentially you want to touch base on how well you're staying in the know with each other. It's super easy to fall out of the know, especially when life gets busy and kind of sweeps us up in our routines. I think too, after kids, especially after that first kid, but knowing has like these never ending horizon points where the more life you live together, the more there is to get to know. And I think often we kind of get in this rut where we're like, I already know you. I don't need to like keep digging into you, but we do. And so checking in on that. How are we doing with staying in the know? And knowing also has some components like how much time we're together, how much togetherness we have, and how much talking we're doing. So you kind of check in on those areas, touch base. Do we need to make any adjustments there? Your attitude toward each other, I think, is a huge component in marriage. It's like this hidden kind of thing that can sabotage our relationships is when we get stuck in negative attitudes toward each other. So you want to check in on that and think about, how's my attitude towards you? Is there anything I need to clarify? Sometimes we project meaning onto things that our partners do that maybe is not accurate. So checking in on things like that and recalibrating our attitude. How we're meeting each other's needs change in so many ways. Checking in on how we're prioritizing each other. And then also checking in on our sexual relationship and our affection, whether that's with words or with touch.
So is it more just like you're really just turning those dials and this meeting is 20 minutes to be like, hey, is there anything that happened this week that I should know about that you haven't told me? Hey,
like
did we touch each other enough this week?
Yeah. Maybe you're like, I feel like, on Wednesday there was this thing that happened and I maybe didn't express my need very clearly. Like, did you catch that? How are we doing on this, in this way? And you're just touching base. You're checking things out. I mean, the thing is that, when you look at research on reasons why people divorce, oftentimes what you'll see is falling out of love and growing apart. What the heck does that mean? It's so kind of ambiguous, right? But how I would explain that is that oftentimes we kind of go through our life with these imbalances in our relationship and we don't necessarily check in. And so it becomes our new normal. That we're just in a relationship where we don't really meet each other's needs. Or we're just in a relationship where we barely ever touch each other. Or they become the new normal and kind of go 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road. And it's become one of those relationships where there's these chronic vulnerabilities that lead to this flatness in the relationship, this slow leap, or this major blowout where all of a sudden it's been 10 years and you're like, we don't even know each other. I don't think I love you anymore. And so it's just important to continually check in, touch base, turn those dials. And if you need to schedule stuff for deeper conversations, you do it at that meeting.
Yeah, I think it's almost like doing mechanical work on your car and like always getting your checkup, your totally. service appointments versus like driving it into the ground and then being like, what do you mean I have $5,000 worth of damage? Like,
exactly.
I love that. No, I think that's really important because it is, I think, for a lot of people who are ambitious and then you have kids and your check-ins are really around like, hey, what did he eat today? And like, how was his day? And where did he go? And then you're really not actually checking in with each other on what we each need. So bringing kids into the mix, how do marriages after kids not only survive, but really thrive?
Yeah. This is such a big topic. So that if you do one thing, just do what I just talked about. Do the meetings. That's the one thing. Yeah, that's the one thing. Another thing to be aware of is we talk about this in our couples course too. It's called the starvation principle. And a lot of couples do this where they don't really feed their relationship till it's starving. This happens so often after kids. And so it's basically like, if you kind of just picture the stereotypical situation where it's like, life is crazy. You've got all these extracurriculars. You got kids running around. You got work obligations. And it's been 6 months since you've gone out and spent some time together. The couple finally gets this time together and it's super awkward. And they don't even really know how to talk to each other. And it takes, 30 minutes or maybe a glass of wine if you drink or something to like get into that groove. Before you know it, you're realizing you like each other. You have fun. You pull into the driveway and you're like, we have got to do this more often. You walk into the door, life happens and it another 6 months go by. And so it's important to be mindful of that pattern that is so incredibly common after kids, and to stay on top of prioritizing your relationship. I also have outlined before 4 ways that relationships commonly break down after kids. So I can go through some of those. I mean, one big one. Okay. So the first one is that unmet expectations require exploration. So something that happens that we're not totally always aware of is that we enter into our relationship with a huge amount of expectations about all the things. Okay. What married life is going to be like if you're married, what your partner is going to be like, what they're going to do for you. You have this like vision of your life. Now, you also have this for what life with kids looks like, but they often, I call them scripts, they often don't click into focus until after kids enter the picture. So they're like these dormant seeds. And then you bring a kid into the mix and all of a sudden it's been watered and they develop and they bloom. And you're like, what the heck has happened? And why am I constantly disappointed and frustrated? And now I'm feeling resentful. And so it's really important before kids, or even if you already have kids, to dig into what your expectations are. So in what areas? Okay. So you want to think about what are your expectations for yourself as a parent after kids, as well as for your partner as a parent and as a partner after kids. So you're thinking about, let me say this again, because it can get a little bit confusing. For yourself as a partner and a parent, and your partner as a partner and a parent. Okay? Like, how do I expect them to take care of me? How do I expect them to be involved? All of these things are scripts that are usually dormant until kids come into the picture. And I think if we don't talk about these things, these sort of misunderstandings will start to happen pretty often in our relationship, and they start to feel very personal if we don't really discuss them and explore them. So in my relationship, I can give an example so this can be very clear. I grew up in a family where we really make a big deal out of celebrations. So birthdays are a big deal. First day of school is a big deal. Like, everything is a big deal. So my husband, on the other hand, we just went home for his mom's 65th birthday, and like, we're the only ones who got her a present. Like, they don't really celebrate stuff very much. And before kids, he kind of knew what to do, and it was just the two of us. There were no other distractions, and he did all right. After kids, it started to slip, and Mother's Day suddenly became like the most important day ever to me because I grew up in a family that celebrates everything. And I'll never forget that first Mother's Day. I was grossly like disappointed. And I had these massive expectations for what he would do and how he would treat me and what he would say. Like, it was supposed to be this magical day, and it was so disappointing. And I was so offended. It was like, you don't care about me. You don't think this is an important job that I do. I personalized everything, which is so incredibly common. But we hadn't talked about it. He didn't know that I had this. And look where he came from. I mean, really, in all honesty, he's come so far in how he celebrates things. So it's really important to explore these together, whether you already have kids or you're expecting.
I love that so much, because I do think so many people know it's like when you have expectations, that's when disappointment and resentment really like set in.
Oh, yeah.
And I grew up in the same sort of a family, so I know what you're talking about. Like, Christmas is a big deal. The holidays, I'm like, I better get breakfast in bed, a handwritten card. Like, we better have like some like homemade thoughtful present that has a picture of me and Bash on it. Of
exactly.
course.
And what did your kid get you? Like, I wanted like a present from the baby.
Of course. Totally. Of course.
Obviously, that's what you do, but
that's how you were raised. So those are your expectations. So these are great things to explore, is just down to almost like the logistics of it.
Yes.
And I think, I don't know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I love rom-coms. Like I will watch rom-coms left and right. I think the feeling of feeling romantic and just that like newlywed feeling of like, this relationship is amazing. And I'm like, I can't wait to get a text from him or an email or like butterflies being picked up for a date. I think we all think that stuff's going to like just be that way forever.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
How do we keep that going in our relationship for the long run? And obviously relationships change. So we don't want to set those unexpected expectations that, you know, the guy or our boyfriend, fiance, husband, now a father of our children that we've been together since 2007 is going to make us have butterflies like the first date. But we all want to hold on to that. And we want to continue to like create that in our relationship. What advice do you have there?
I think, part of it is like twofold. Like one, you want to attack those expectations because I think a lot of us do come into relationships, even though cognitively we're like, we don't think that's reality. It is sort of under the surface playing a part in our expectations. So we might need to like reevaluate those a touch so they're a little bit more realistic. And then the other piece of it is, part of that feeling of kind of like euphoria and excitement is just like this process of like discovering each other and knowing each other. And so when we fall into ruts in our relationship, we take away opportunity to continue to cultivate that experience. And so it's important that, a lot, I hear it from so many parents where it's like, kids come first now. And kids are important. And our generation, the millennial generation, like far and away above any other generation, puts kids like at the forefront. We're doing like a good job taking care of our kiddos. But like we have got to prioritize our partners. Our kids absorb so much from how we take care of them and how we take care of the relationship. And they're creating their templates for their relationship. So prioritizing our relationship and staying in the know and doing fun things together that are new and exciting and discovering new interests together, all of that stuff helps to perpetuate that feeling of kind of newness and excitement together.
I love that. So let's go back to the 4 things that break down marriage other than expectations. What are the other 3?
So the other one, the next one is increased responsibility requires negotiation. So that's a big one. So we can go as deep or shallow as you want on this. But if we look at the research, if we're just talking marriage after kids, it's been researched a lot since like the 50s, and they tend to find the same kind of depressing result, which is like, marital satisfaction kind of dips after kids. When you pick apart the research and you look at, why? What's going on for each partner? I'm just talking about like heterosexual marriage because that's what a lot of this research is on. So what they find is that for men, it's usually a change in the sexual relationship as well as worry about finances. But when you look at for women, it is loss of freedom as well as an increase in responsibilities. And then if you really start to analyze this, it's like, if responsibilities increase for the women and they're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, there's more on their plate, that's going to trickle into the sexual relationship. So it starts to become this sort of, cause and effect sort of situation. But there is just a massive amount of extra things that need to be done and worried about after kids. And it's important that a couple comes together, and if you can do this beforehand, it's even better, but at any time, it's just helpful. It comes together and talks about how are we going to tackle all the new stuff and who's going to do what. And so often, we don't really ever talk about our roles in our relationship. It's just not a common conversation that couples have, nor do they really negotiate those. And so, it's time. It's time to do that, to come together and have some sort of negotiation about who does what.
It's funny because you're saying just like going through the differences between men and women losing their freedom and increasing their responsibilities, and then men worrying about the finances and seeing like this big change in their sexual relationship. I could easily see if Chris and I were in our previous jobs, how that would have just totally manifested in this world, because Chris was a big, like high-powered attorney who worked 16-hour days and would have literally just been like grinding to put money into college savings plans.
Yes.
I would have probably taken my job and not taken a back seat, but probably would have lightened my hours and done a full-time mom thing, and really been maybe resentful of like the lack of help I was getting. And I could just see how it would have played out. I am in a very non-traditional type of a relationship because of the way that our careers have kind of unfolded, where Chris took a break from being an attorney to write and try his hand in the creative field and to be an entrepreneur. And my business has obviously like become something that I didn't expect at the time it would become. And I'm really proud of that. But we always have to negotiate. Like we always have to talk about like, what does a week look like? When am I taping podcasts? Like, when am I seeing clients? When am I have Zoom calls with my courses? Like, okay, he knows he's covering those hours, and I always have bedtime. I never book things after 4, like just in case, there are all these things that we've had, and it's taken the entire time. And every time it's like a change of scenery and a change of schedule, we have to constantly communicate, because with COVID and everything, we don't have a nanny. We don't have, constant support. Yeah. And so it is a 24/7 conversation that at first was like grinding gears, but now is kind of a well-oiled machine. But I could see how someone could easily fall into these roles of resentment and being like, I'm doing everything. You played a part in like making these babies with me.
Exactly. Like, why did I do this on my own?
Yeah. And I see it with so many of my friends, and like, I know it would have been us. Like we were going into our marriage. Talk about expectations. We were going into our marriage like, we had it all planned out.
Yes.
And everything kind of has really changed. But now I do see some silver linings from that, because it just constantly causes us to negotiate. But that's a really traditional style of like heterosexual marriage and like financial responsibility and child rearing and all of that. How can we as parents now make sure that we're splitting the workload and having those conversations and kind of keeping the sex life alive?
I know, right? I mean, I have a whole course on this topic because it's just so big and so impactful to relationships. So, as always, I think expectations are part of it. I think some people don't realize how traditional they are in their mindset until kids come into the picture. They're like, we do everything, we equal and all that. And then kids come in and all of a sudden the roles kind of click in and she's doing more of the childcare and sacrificing more of her career stuff. So I think it's important to discuss it beforehand. But when it comes to dealing with the inequality of responsibilities in the relationship, I talk about it, tackling it from 2 perspectives. So from the within and the between. And I think you said something though that I want to really like highlight. You said how things are constantly changing for you guys. So you're constantly having to talk about the responsibilities. And that's something that's really important when we think about responsibilities in our relationship, is that different life circumstances are going to bring about different needs. And so when you find a good balance, it's going to get thrown out of balance. This is like a theme of our conversation, right? It's like you're going to find it for like a minute and then it's going to get all messed up and you're going to have to keep coming back to it. So this, like many things in relationships, is a topic that you're probably going to have to revisit quite often. And I think so many couples have been confronted with this during COVID and all of the extra demands. But the within and the between, the ultimate goal is not necessarily to achieve perfect equality, but instead it's to achieve a distribution that feels fair. Because ultimately resentment will come about when things feel unfair. And so if one partner is working 2 jobs and the other partner's part-time job, it's unlikely that's going to be 50-50. So you got to figure out what feels fair in the relationship. And I talk about within is like what an individual can do to change the relationship if their partner does nothing. Because sometimes people are like, my partner isn't on board with any of these things. What can I do? And those are essentially mindset shifts and behaviors that can get in the way of effectively renegotiating some of this stuff. So I talk about it in 2 categories. One's that stories that sabotage. That's something like, if I don't do it myself, it will never get done, which then leads us to just do it and do it all. And so I talk about how do you rewrite your story? And then the other, I give 5 behaviors that backfire. Things like micromanaging or criticizing. So, hey, do you mind getting the kids dressed? That's what they're wearing types of thing, that sort of criticism and things that as an individual, if you're trying to hand off some of the responsibilities, how can you do it in a way that makes space for your partner to figure it out and to feel encouraged to keep doing it rather than shutting them down? And then the other is the between. And so much of this stuff is about really making the invisible visible. One of the easiest ways to get started, and also the one way that people fight the most, is by just asking. Just ask for what you need. People fight that so hard, but so often in our relationships, we just do it instead of asking, and then we resent that we did it. And if we've fallen into patterns, and I talk about this more in my course, but if we've fallen into patterns where we tend to just take care of things, it's unreasonable to expect our partner to go from us doing it to them suddenly being this active initiator of things. And so I suggest ask, and let's rebrand asking in our minds as teaching, guiding. I hate to say the word training, but I can't think of a better word right now, but helping them kind of learn what needs to be done and become more involved in that process. Also, it's helpful to write things out, come together at one of the check-ins and talk about what do each of us do and how can we reestablish a normal that feels more fair.
I love that, because it's never going to be 50-50. And
no.
Like you said, I can joke about balance and blood sugar. Well, you have a pancreas that supports you to do that. And you have hormones that help you do that. It's not like if you were really in control of trying to figure out how to balance your blood sugar only with food without hormonal help, it just wouldn't work. Like the body is naturally doing that balancing for you and supporting you to stay balanced. But I can see how in a relationship, so we have to be like the hormones. We got to check in and be like, hey, are you doing too much? Am I doing too much? Does this seem fair? Because it's never really fair. People have stuff going on too. Like there's family illnesses. There's big work deadlines. There's times when people are going to have to pick up the slack. I can just even think in the last month of launching my pregnancy course and going into the grind right before filming and filming and hiding out at my parents' house, and Chris was full on, and now we're dealing with some family illness stuff, and I'm a stay-at-home mom, basically full-time stay-at-home mom, and he's doing his thing. But it's we know it's temporary, we know we can get through it, but it's it is when we come back together, making sure things are just fair. And I love that. I love that so much.
You guys are doing a good job.
I mean, I don't know. We've been together since we were babies, but it does really help that we have this very non-traditional approach, because we can't really fall back into the habits of our parents. So that expectation of it being the way, I know what I thought we were getting ourselves into was he would go to an office in a suit. Yes. I would make coffee and breakfast. He makes our coffee. There are so many things that are just so backwards from the way that we kind of anticipated our life going, but it does, because it's not it's not just autopilot and it's not based on our past. It does require us to do that. But I still want to make sure that I'm attacking all four things.
Oh yeah. Sorry. I know. I'm like, these are so big. I know.
No, but it's good just to think about it because I can compartmentalize it. Like expectations are easy, like, but again, they're not mind readers, our partners. Yes, so we have to be like very clear and then negotiating so everything seems fair. I mean, like that is just preventing resentment. So it's
exactly.
What do you need? Here's my expectations. Here, how do we talk about this so we're preventing resentment and making sure that there's nothing that's standing in our way from like wanting to jump each other's bones and like hang out and talk and all that good stuff. And what's 3 and 4?
So 3 is decreased intimacy requires connection. And so that's just tackling that other piece that can often dip after kids is if not just sex, but just like that sense of closeness and intimacy starts to just like it gets back burnered. You want to make sure it doesn't stay there. You want to keep that flame alive. That's important. And then the last one is that hidden resentments require reconciliation. And so that's kind of like resentment can be sort of the culmination, like you were just saying, of the other ones. So if your expectations are going unmet, you're not expressing these, resentments can develop if you feel things are inequitable and it just keeps going on like that. Like you don't have a partner in this, resentments can start to develop. So it's important to just keep tabs on these 4 areas and do the work there.
I love it. I love it so much. The resentment stuff is sort of the easiest to understand because you're like, you just feel those things. You know, they're in you and you notice whatever it is that your partner is doing. And they may do it maybe little at first. And then over time, you're like, simple example. When Chris and I got together, so we're Catholic and we go to this like engaged encounter before we get married when you're getting married in the Catholic Church, which is basically like therapy for a weekend and talking about God. And I remember Chris being like, everything's good, but like you always leave the shampoo caps open and it's diluting all the soap and like it's sort of a random thing, but I think it was like really building up over time that's an example of who I am in our relationship, which is like, he's very in control. He's very organized. Everything is like, all the labels are facing out, and I am a yard sale. Like I'm not, and people joke when I say this, but it's like, I'm not dirty. I'm just like sort of messy, sometimes.
A yard sale is the perfect image.
But it's definitely what I should have known is back then that it would come up multiple times throughout our relationship living together and it wouldn't be the shampoo tops, but maybe like always leaving this cup in this location or whatever it may be. But the resentment thing seems like really easy to start to see kind of building up.
Yes.
And I guess, I mean, you have the tools for this, but I guess it's probably that meeting, right? As like, are you feeling any resentment? What's causing it? Like, how can I address that for you? Because I think a lot of times for me, like I said, Chris is more of an introvert. He deals with things on his own. He's cerebral. I'm like, hey, close the shampoo caps. He won't tell me until we've been together for 5 years for an engaged encounter.
I'm dying right now because like it took like 3 years. And actually that was my husband's complaint about me. He's like, you don't put lids on. And I was like, this is your beef with me? Like, I'm like, wow, I've got a lot more to say than you do. But one day I shook the orange juice and I had to put the lid on. All the way, and I learned my lesson. Like after that,
there you go. You got you had your own consequence.
I know, or maybe he unscrewed it to like make it work.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I think but I think it's the untalked about stuff, right? Where I'm just like, no offense, babe, but like this should have happened like 3 days after you notice that I leave the Dr. Bronner's cap open. Like, all you got to do is be like, babe, it bothers me that you leave the caps open. And my response to that was like, well, I'm probably always going to leave the caps open. So I'm going to buy the pumps. So now I have like a big pump and I don't have to worry about leaving
Yeah, I mean,
the cap's open. Nothing's getting diluted.
I can't believe you worried about the soap getting diluted. That's amazing. Like it somehow made its way in. Well, you brought up like a really good point. So very simply, because there's a lot to say about resentment, so I'm going to say it very simply. There's two ways of tackling it. You have to take personal responsibility as an individual in the relationship. So if he's not expressing to you, like to use your example, that this bothers him, then he's not doing his part to deal with the development of resentment. Right? So it's important. So that's one side is personal responsibility. And the other side is this sort of like collaborative rebuilding. Okay. And so a lot of resentment though is this personal side of it, which is to check in with things like, have I expressed my needs and my expectations to my partner? Have I made this clear? The other is, have I started focusing on all of the things that bother me and moving all the things I love about my partner to the background, and all the things that bother me are now in the foreground? And do I need to clean out this picture of my partner and make some adjustments? Am I sort of fixating on certain things? Am I making meaning of these things? And so this is all like personal responsibility for things that plays into resentment and how you ultimately have to tackle it. And then the other is, okay, so now he's expressed it. Now you guys got to like be collaborative in how you make those corrections. And if it's gone on a long time, it might require like rebuilding trust and the one individual forgiving, so that it can get pretty in depth and lengthy. But you guys collaborated. You're like, we'll buy pumps. Done. Right? So sometimes it's that simple too. So it's an individual and then a between sort of dynamic there.
I can see how both can really sort of seed resentment or allow it to continue, if you will. Yes. I love that you brought up the point of like, are you ruminating on something that maybe is negative, but like, what does it really mean? Because it's like anything in our life. It's like something negative happens and you're just, I don't know. It's like, you're just thinking about it over and over and over. You're giving it all this power and then it's taking over. Which is interesting because I love bragging about Chris because he's so shy. And like I said, just like he's not a boastful guy. Like I'm always like, he was valedictorian of his high school. Like,
that's amazing.
Like I know. And I'm like, I was a B+, like just super involved flashcard girl. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I just am so proud of him. And I think I'm proud of him for leaving law. I'm proud of him for following his dreams. Like, I think he's the best dad ever. And he doesn't listen to the podcast, thank God, because he would literally kill me for this.
He would die. But
sweet. I do think when you have the opportunity to like talk about all the good things about your partner out loud, I find that, I mean, I'm reminding myself and solidifying those things, because it is easy to be like, and then he did this. And then he did that. And why didn't he? And then that's all you're really talking about, complaining about.
And I think that's one of the most powerful forces in our relationships. And you're so smart to say how when you speak it, it really gives it a lot of power and you're reminding yourself. But so often we do kind of collect these little grievances. And it's crazy how from like one moment to the next, our attitude toward our partner can completely shift. And then we only see them through this lens of all of the negative things. So we are in charge of our attitude and how we make meaning of stuff and what we focus on. And so it's such an important piece in relationships.
Oh, it's so good. Well, let's kick it back to decreased intimacy and how we can increase the intimacy, and how do we even identify what kind of intimacy our partner needs?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all of these could be unpacked in so many ways, but it's really important to talk about it. I mean, first and foremost, because all of this stuff plays together, because your relationship is impacted by your sex life is impacted by the health of your relationship. You got to talk about where you're at and what's going on. After kids, women experience a ton of changes, emotionally, physically. mentally. And so it's important to come together and really connect around this issue and to be gracious and gentle with each other. Talk about what's changed. Talk about, what are your turn-ons and what are the things that shut down your ability to be even like thinking about having an intimate relationship, and collaborate together and working on coming up with a plan to turn on all the things that turn you on and turn off the things that shut down your desire. And also, like I said this, I think in one of my posts, but your intimate relationship like really starts outside the bedroom. So it's really important to be kind of like these mutual caretakers in the relationship, to prioritize each other's needs, to be doing all the things that you do in a healthy relationship to take care of one another and checking in with each other. And if sex takes a little bit of a break for a bit, that's okay. There's lots of ways to be intimate with each other and to touch each other and to stay connected in those ways.
I love it. I think that, I obviously just have had one relationship since 2007. So we got a long time here, but it is interesting just in understanding, kind of like trying to understand these things. It's something that all of the things that we talked about today makes me want to go talk to Chris even more. It's going to be like, who did you just talk to?
Who is this
What is happening? But I think it is, for me, it's like if Chris puts his arm around me in public or grabs my hand or is like really like physically affectionate, and obviously like not having sex with me in public, but like, just like the little touches in front of other people or just on our couch when we're alone or whatever, like that is my favorite form of intimacy, is like just that, like, there's just like that big bear cuddle on, care for you type of intimacy. And I know his is like the exact opposite. Like if I were to grab his hand in public, he'd be like a little bit embarrassed, but he'd do it, and he was never a guy for PDA. But if I were to sit down and be like, how are you feeling? And what are you thinking about? Or like, what are your aspirations? Or like to talk about something that he's super interested in, that would be like his foreplay.
Totally.
So
totally. Yeah.
And I think people, I don't know. I know that there are specific gender roles where people would think it would be the opposite, where a girl wants more like of that emotional conversation where he's listening to me and I'm just like, I really just want him to touch me. Like, I think everyone is different, and just not like falling into those like cultural or like traditional expectations of like what is actually going to open the doors for your intimacy and sexual relationship is interesting. But
yeah, I think we can often miss the mark on this stuff because it's really easy to love others like we like to be loved. So it's like probably way easier for him to like engage you in a conversation like that than it is for him to do PDA. So it's so important that we come together and we're on the same page about this stuff so we can love our partners in the ways that they need versus in the ways that are comfortable for us. And that's all like emotional foreplay.
Yeah, it's like the love languages, right?
Totally, love
like,
languages.
How are you? How
brilliant? Yep.
So funny to, but it's just like true, because that's all I do when I'm so proud of him or like feeling all giddy for him. Like I am probably making him embarrassed by touching his human body in public. But I think it's really good just to bring this to the forefront of everyone's mind, especially now. What you were saying earlier was we can all be in the grind of life. Like it's so crazy right now. I think it's always going to be crazy. Like
it's always crazy.
You have to just, and maybe we don't even call it crazy anymore. We just call it life, and we make time for those other things because then it's our narrative, right? That it's like so stressful and so crazy.
Exactly.
Like all of 2020, that's what everyone's been saying is like, it's so hard. And
then we all feel stressed and overwhelmed, right?
And you're like, of course I feel this way. Everyone's telling me that's how I'm supposed to feel. And this is what's happening. And yes, there are like so many challenges, but like to like try and focus on the stuff we are doing a good job at or making time for or whatever. So before we close it up, and this was so fun, by the way, but I want to touch on mom guilt because I think specifically it's so timely for right now based on moms being house managers, Zoom at-home teachers, full-time working mamas, whatever, all the are in the air. And it's just coming with an inability to be what you think would be 100% if that was your only role. So
I know. Ugh, this is so hard. Yeah. So mom guilt. I know. I feel like all these things. I'm like, can we do 10 episodes and unpack each one? Okay. So let me.
Or they can just go take your course, like I'm
right. Yes, my course. Yeah, I do talk about guilt in my course on the mental load called the mother load. So, okay, what's guilt? Guilt is this belief, right, that you've violated some either like moral principle or standard of how you kind of should be. So there's two types of guilt. There's deserved guilt, which is helpful. Just like I cheated on a test and now I confess and, right my wrongs. Then there's undeserved, which we have so much of as moms, which is guilt that isn't really based in reality. And it usually comes from some sort of impossible standard that we've set for ourselves. And impossible standards are essentially like expectations that have been taken to the extreme. And when we live through these impossible standards, we will experience tons and tons of undeserved mom guilt. So an example would be something like, if I don't sacrifice all of my needs, I'm a bad mom. So then maybe you go out and you get like a little time alone and then you can't even enjoy it because the whole time you feel guilty because you're trying to meet this impossible standard that you should sacrifice every single need that you have. And so it's just this like, it's just like a suck of joy. Really, I feel like guilt just like sucks all of the energy and joy out of things. And so it's so important to unearth these impossible standards and then just attack them. So the way that I like to suggest kind of going at them is first you've got to be aware of them. And then you kind of just examine them. So what's the evidence that this is actually true? Where am I getting these messages from? Where was I taught this? What is the evidence that this is not true? And then you write a new standard. Now, a lot of times it ends there if you look at kind of like this technique. But I always like to add two more things. One is an in the moment mantra. Because in the moment, a lot of times we're not going to like fully access our whole revised kind of standards. So create a one-liner. Like, I am not just a mom. I am other things too, and I deserve time. That might even be too long. But you create an in the moment kind of sentence that captures that revised standard. So when that guilt kind of creeps up, you can snap yourself kind of back into the right mindset with that mantra. And then the other one is to add in one behavioral change. Because a lot of times we'll try to change our mindset, but then we don't change our behavior. And so they're at odds. So try to get on the same page. And the more sometimes too that you behave differently, the feelings will start to follow. So you're kind of attacking it from both ways. So if you have this impossible standard that you have to sacrifice everything, start incorporating a regular practice where you are putting yourself first and that mantra, and do it again and again and again until you have kind of erased that guilt.
I love that so much because one of the biggest things I deal with clients that are moms is the guilt of working out.
Yeah.
The guilt of taking an hour away from their kids, of that means that they're not cutting the sandwiches or the apple slices into perfect stars. And it's that time for themselves. It's like, what, 4% of your day or something? Like
I know, right? You quantify it. It puts it in perspective.
Yeah, you really can start to like break it down. And what I do see on the other end of it is like getting themselves that 30 minutes, that 45 minutes, that hour a day to themselves, that whether they decide to work out or they decide to journal or to like think about something for themselves, whatever it is, it's the energy and the joy they have coming back into that parenting role or back into that wife role or back into their work role is so much more enthused and, like
100%.
Fueled because they put their oxygen mask on first.
Yeah. It's all the things that like those things, like you can't pour from an empty cup and put it out, right? It's all that stuff, but they're sayings for a reason. It's absolutely true.
Well, I love adding the mantra. That's something I'm going to take into my practice for sure, because there is, and just the repetition in the practice, because I think that's the hardest part is they're there. They're like, I'm doing this. I'm supposed to be doing this, but I still feel guilty. Say the mantra, do it enough to not feel guilty and to really start to reap the joy and the benefits that the other part of your life is receiving because you've taken care of yourself is such a good call.
Exactly.
I love it so much, Morgan. Well, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, this has been fun.
So excited to get these, to get this podcast out and to even write my notes down from today because Chris is in trouble.
I know. I'm like, my apologies to Chris. I'm very sorry.
No. It's funny because, like I said, he does like to be listened to, and he likes to talk. He just doesn't like to feel like I'm bringing up something that's wrong. And because he internalizes and feels guilty for anything that's ever wrong. And I'm like, no, I mean, I just am getting it out in the air. Like no one's mad or like resentful. I'm just going to tell you the minute it bothers me, not like later.
It sounds like he has a good conscience, right? Yeah.
I'm a lucky girl. I'm very lucky. So we'll tell people where they can follow along.
Sure.
I'm definitely going to deep dive your courses. I'm so excited. Where they can follow along, find you, courses, all the things you offer.
All the things. So I'm on Instagram at mylovethinks. I do series about different relationship topics, which maybe is a little bit different than some of the other accounts on this stuff. Because obviously I like to deep dive into things and it's not enough for one square. Also, we have a blog at www.mylovethinks.com. And then we have several online courses. We have flagship courses, which are, we have one for singles, one for engaged couples, and then one for committed couples. And we give away the first session of all of those for free. So you can at least kind of have a glimpse into what they're all about, what they look like, what you can expect. And you can find those either through Instagram or the blog or at online.mylovethinks.com. And then there you'll also find the course on the mental load, which is the mother load. And I've started doing live webinars, which is like kind of a new thing. And so some of those are available, the replays. I just did one on how to have a thriving marriage after kids. And then I have one coming up. Maybe by the time this airs, though, will be over, but on sex and marriage. So those are all available at online.mylovethinks.com.
I love it. So much good information. And I think people have the time now, or they may be looking to learn and explore, and things are coming up in their relationship. You're giving people the tools to really to have those open conversations, to have those weekly or monthly check-ins, and turn the dials if they need to. So thank you so much for your time. This was so fun.
Thank you for having me.
I, as always, so excited to read your posts and follow along. So thanks, Morgan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at BEWELL.ByKelly.com and follow me on Instagram at BEWELL.ByKelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.